Our next speaker, who is João Pedro de Magalhães from University of Liverpool, and he will be talking about longevity pharmacology comes of age. Do we have João Pedro online?
Yes, hi.
Hi, João Pedro.
Martin.
Great to see you. Thank you very much for joining.
Likewise. Thank you. My pleasure.
I always have like a heightened heart rate every time I have to ask if people are there. So I'm great that you say hello. And I think we're ready to for you to share your screen and listen to your wonderful talk.
So I'll share my screen. Okay, so is it working okay? Can you see my slides?
Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Well, thank you to the organizers, well, Martin, Alex, for the invitation and for setting up this conference. It's very exciting. I mean, unfortunately, I can't see the audience, but I saw that there's over 1,000 people registered for this conference, which is really a great example of the progress we've made in the field of biogerontology. So I'll actually start just like very quickly reminder about the history of aging research and biogerontology, because it wasn't always this big events. So if you look into the old days of biogerontology, by the way, that's a photo of a library in my hometown of Porto. It wasn't always particularly popular to study the process of aging, and we don't have to go that far into the past. So one of the early pioneers in the field of aging research said that one colleague told me that I would fall off the edge of the earth if I studied aging. And that was about 30 years ago, so not that long ago. And this colleague, of course, is Cynthia Kenyon, who is now one of the big names and major pioneers in the field of biogerontology. So thankfully, she didn't fall from the edge of the earth, but quite the contrary, she made seminal and major breakthroughs in the field. And I guess there's been this shift in the field of aging in the past 20, 30 years, thanks to Cynthia and others. I guess one of the major aspects is that we now know that the process of aging is plastic, and we can manipulate it, we can accelerate it, we can retard it. So, this is just an example from a recent paper of a survival curve in worms, where you can see that these particular mutations, they considerably extend longevity. And we've heard also from Brian Kennedy about how we can do this from a pharmacological perspective. So there's been really these great breakthroughs in showing that the process of aging can be manipulated. And I think that's really what has attracted a lot of attention to the field. Aging is a plastic process. I mean, for also an overview, I just published in just a few days ago in the British Medical Journal, there's this piece on gerosciences coming of age that I recommend. And actually, Cynthia now, her quotes are much more optimistic that, maybe we can change a human gene and double the human lifespan based on all of these findings from animal models. And Cynthia, as many of you, I'm sure, are aware, she's now the chief scientific officer for Calico, the Google-backed biotech company focusing on aging and longevity. So really, there's been this big shift in excitement of the field. Now, I think changing human genes is still quite complicated. So really, the approach that most companies and labs are using in order to manipulate human aging is by a pharmacological means. And really, again, there's been a huge advance in that. So let me show you. This was something I observed actually so this is from our lab's DrugAge database of aging-related drugs. So these are drugs or compounds that extend lifespan in at least one model organism. And as you can see, there were early works already in discovering compounds that extend lifespan in model systems, but really there's been an explosion in recent years. It's now really this growth in longevity drugs is now exponential. Again, this is mostly driven by studies in animal models, or well, model systems, really. Again, a lot of work in worms, flies, but even rodents as well, like mice and rats. So again, there's been this very impressive growth in the discovery of longevity drugs. Now you may think, well, that's normal. There's more researchers working on aging. We have more findings. So the same should be observed, for example, at the level of genes. Actually, no. To my surprise, when I look at the growth of our GenAge database, so GenAge is a database of genes associated with aging in model systems. So, you know, a gene would be included if its manipulation, its mutation, knockout, silencing results in a significant life extension or an accelerated aging process. And now, you know, thanks to the pioneers of like Cynthia Kenyon, now we know of over 2,000 of these genes. But what is interesting is that, so, you know, although this started with the works of Cynthia and Tom Johnson and others, now really there seems to have plateaued this increase. There was a time when there was an exponential increase in the number of new longevity associated genes, but at least in recent years, it seems to have plateaued. So really what my interpretation is that there's this shift from the genetics of aging to the pharmacological aspects of aging and longevity to the longevity pharmacology, which was, of course, driven by the initial discovery at the genetic level by Cynthia Kenyon and others. And I mean, I do hope that they will receive the Nobel Prize for this pioneering work on genetics of aging. But now there's a shift towards longevity drugs. And I guess that's also accompanied by this increase in the anti-aging biotech sector. You know, I've mentioned Calico, for which Cynthia Kenyon now works, Unity Biotech that works in Senolytics, Longevity Vision Fund that, full disclaimer, I'm a consultant for. I'll talk about Centaura, a company I'm also involved in a little bit, and many other companies, because people have realized that if we can manipulate aging, and if we could do that in human beings, then this would have huge economic benefits. And so from an investment perspective, it would be incredible rewards if we could retard human aging. And actually, when you look, so for many years now that I've also kept a record of companies that work in the anti-aging biotech sector. I mean, it's somewhat subjective. I mean, what is, you know, is a company working on Alzheimer's disease, for example, anti-aging biotech? Well, it kind of depends on the path. If it's targeting pathways associated with aging, then yes. If it's targeting pathways very specific to Alzheimer's disease, then no. So, you know, it is, I use a subjective criteria, but it is consistent across years. And one of the things I've also noticed, I've updated this database of companies working in the anti-aging biotech, which is available online. And there's also been a growth again in recent years. So you see a trend that, you know, there's now over 50 anti-aging biotech companies. I mean, more or less depending on the criteria you define for this. And if you look at these companies, it's actually quite a lot of investment in anti-aging biotech. So here's a list of the 15 longevity companies by investment. So Calico, of course, is by far the biggest. The Google-backed company, they have over $2 billion. But there's quite a lot of other big companies, you know, Human Longevity in San Diego. I've mentioned Unity, Juvenescence as well, which is, well, I guess an investment, more of an investment company, and so on. So there's various companies now, and clearly, again, this showcases all the excitement in the field. So, I mean, I guess we're still, the field of geroscience and biogerontology, we're still small compared to cancer or Alzheimer's disease, but we're definitely much, much bigger than we were 20 years ago. And that's really pleasing to see. Now, of course, there's a lot of still obstacles to how we can commercialize and how we can develop clinical applications for all of these fantastic discoveries in model systems. So when I look at the companies that were in my who's who in gerontology that I started beginning of the century, and now there's actually very few surviving companies. One of them is Geron, which actually now I would say it focuses more on cancer than actually on aging. So although initially it was focused also on aging, now I'm not entirely sure even if it's focused on aging anymore. But given that it still exists, it's one of the very few examples of companies that still exist. So the lifespan of companies, anti-aging biotech companies, is actually quite short. And then, of course, there's other problems we've heard about from Brian Kennedy about the long validation times in aging, the need to discover biomarkers, also from the previous speaker. And so ultimately, really, the number of drug candidates that obtains approval is quite small. I mean, this is not just for aging. This is for pharmacological discovery in general. But we can extrapolate for aging that, it's not going to be better than that. Because we have additional problems, I think, in the field, like the long validation and still the lack of specific biomarkers. And so to give one example, this was something that happened 2 weeks ago. This is the stock price of Unity Biotech. This company focused on senolytics in the summer of 2020. So as you can see, the stock was about $10. And then kind of in the middle of August, it increased to about $12. And then it sharply fell to what it is now, which is about $3. And there was a huge volume here. And what happened, as I'm sure many of you have seen, is that their clinical trial basically failed. So, so there was a clinical trial for a senolytic, I think, targeting osteoarthritis, which I think a phase 2, which failed. And that led them to drop this particular research program, and it also led to this big drop in their stock prices. So this is one example of what can happen. I mean, obviously, we need to do these trials if we want one of them to be successful. But this is one of the risks, of course, that companies in this field endure. Now, fortunately, there's a number of other clinical trials by Unity for senolytics, etc. But the most likely scenario for most of these trials is for them to fail. So what we can do to prevent it or to optimize our chances? So just very briefly, to cover some of the work we've recently done without going into a lot of details due to time restraints. I mean, one of the things that my lab has developed for quite a long time is in silico approaches, computational approaches that help us optimize or prioritize candidates for further experiments or trials. So to give, again, without spending too much time, very, very quickly, just a couple of examples. I mean, we've heard somewhat about AI and machine learning already from the previous speaker, which is something we employ as well for prioritizing candidates, as well as network approaches. So this would be an example of a network of proteins and their interactions, which you can then analyze, for example, to look at which hubs in the network may be regulating the particular phenotype of interest. So to give one example, we published this a few months ago in Genome Biology, where we did this work that focused on cell senescence. And we did various kinds of analysis, including network analysis of genes associated with senescence. This is actually a photo of senescent cells from my PhD. So we did various analyses, and these allow us to discover new genes that regulate cell senescence, which we then tested experimentally. So, I mean, I'm skipping a lot of details, but hopefully this will persuade you to look at our full results, because we did various types of analysis. Now, the other thing we can do as well is we can look at particular signatures. So again, for example, of cell senescence, we can look at gene expression signatures of cell senescence, which we also derived in this work. We derive a conserved signature of cell senescence, which we can then go and look at this into various human tissues. So we can look into which tissues have a stronger activation of cell senescence or of signatures of cell senescence, as that could indicate which ones may be more prone, for example, for having senescent cells as degenerative processes, and more amenable for interventions that target senescent cells. And I mean, again, all of the details are in our paper, but there's actually quite a lot of variation between tissues in terms of induction of cell senescent signatures. I mean, the other thing that is also possible to do is also to try to repurpose compounds for various applications, including life extension, based on a gene expression signatures. So we have gene expression signatures of drugs that we can search for drugs that induce molecular signatures that are similar to life extension, that may prevent cell senescence, etc. So the point is that we can overlap signatures, molecular signatures of a phenotype of interest, aging, life extension, cell senescence, with those molecular signatures of drugs to identify and prioritize compounds. And I mean, we've done this, again, I won't go into details. We published this a few years back already, but we've done this and we identified 5 drugs that we tested in worms, 4 of which extended lifespan via this drug repositioning approach. So again, I don't have time to go into a lot of detail, but hopefully this will persuade you to look at our full results. Now, the other thing about all of these biotech companies is, what kind of approaches are, or kind of pathways and genes are they focusing on? So that's one of the things I've done recently. By the way, most of this presentation is actually inspired by an article I currently have submitted called, just like this talk, Longevity Pharmacology Comes of Age, which is currently submitted for publication. So when you look at these companies that work on anti-aging, quite a few of them work on oxidative stress and mitochondria, developing antioxidants, which is, I guess, an old field in biogerontology. Many, like Unity Biotech, but many others, we heard previously on skin applications, for instance, of senolytics, but many companies focus on targeting senescent cells, using senolytics and other drugs. And quite a few also focus on mediators of dietary restriction, which I guess would be the cases of the TOR pathway, NAD+, etc. So there's some specific areas, specific pathways, specific processes that I would say the majority of anti-aging biotech companies focus on. And in fact, if anything, I actually think that there is a relatively narrow focus of anti-aging biotech. I mean, a lot of companies focus on the hallmarks of aging, or one or more than one hallmarks of aging, and focus on these particular processes. But I actually think we should be more creative. There's not only these pathways that are certainly important for aging and longevity. So I do think we should be aim to be more creative in our approach in anti-aging. And so before I finish, and actually with that in mind, I just wanted to actually mention this company, Centauro, which Brian mentioned previously, that I've recently become the head of science, and that we aim to radically reverse aging. So we aim not with pharmacological approaches, because their effect sizes will be limited, but we aim to develop gene therapy interventions that allow us to reverse aging, not just slow it down like you can do pharmacologically. So it's obviously a high risk approach, but one that can also have much higher rewards than a pharmacological approach. So with that in mind, I'll just thank the lab. So I point out Roberto, who did a lot of the analysis of cell senescence networks, and of course, thank all my lab at university for all of the work also on the various databases that I mentioned, like Zoya and Inez that worked a lot, and also previous lab members that work on our various databases, and also our funding sources. And again, I skipped a lot of details. Happy to answer questions here or on Slack. And of course, feel free to drop me a line later if you wish. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, João Pedro. That was really an interesting talk. We have some questions online. Maybe I can ask a question first also. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what Centauro does? That sounds like a really interesting company.
So our goal is to develop the gene therapy approaches and also figure out where we need to. So, I mean, I guess if we want to reverse aging, I think we need to tweak genes. I don't see how we can do it with a pharmacological approach. So we need to tweak genes, and more than one. So we need to develop on a first hand the technology to do that. So, and that's one of the projects we have ongoing. And on the other hand, figure out exactly which genes we want to modify. Now, we have some ideas, but we don't. We still need to optimize. So, figure out which genes we actually have to modify and how in order to reverse aging in humans, or at least in a specific tissue. So that's our goal. I mean, the other thing I would point out that I actually forgot is, so we're currently recruiting for Centaurus. So if you're interested in working with us on reversing aging, yes, please feel free to drop me a line or check out the website, and there's more information on that as well.
Well, thank you very much. So we have a question from David Garcia online here on Slack, who asks, what do you think about epigenetic clocks? Are they measuring the adaptation of the organism to the damage of aging, or rather the actual pace of aging? May therefore therapies like partial epigenetic reprogramming achieve actual rejuvenation and not only slow down aging?
Yeah, well, so that's a great question, and I mean. I guess the short answer is we don't know what it's doing. I mean, I think Steve Horvath is giving a talk in this conference, and I've asked him that same question, and his answer, I mean, he's like the pioneer in this, and his answer is, I don't know. I mean, there are hypotheses, but we still don't know whether the epigenetic clock is a reflective of mechanism and adaptation, or is really driving the degeneration. I don't know. I think we need a lot more research into it. Maybe we'll ask that question to Steve.
Okay, maybe one last. Further elaborate on the note to be more creative in the aging research.
Well, I guess the point is that if you look at the 50 anti-aging biotechs, most of them are focusing on a relatively small number of processes and targets. So now you could argue, all right, but those are the ones that have the most evidence. And that's true for model organisms. Those are the ones that have the most evidence for, but it doesn't mean they're the only approaches. And certainly when I look at other fields, okay, so cancer is a bigger field. There's more companies, there's more money, there's more people, but you also see a bigger diversity. So I guess without going into a lot of details, let's put it this way. I think there's more to the process of aging than just the hallmarks of aging, than just oxidative stress, senolytics, well, antioxidants, senolytics, and dietary restriction. There has to be more to it. And it may be riskier, it may be harder to intervene in those. But I also think that if we really want to have a major impact on aging, that's other pathways that we have to go for. And that's, for instance, why I think the approach by Centauri is very exciting.
Very cool. Thank you very much, João Pedro. I think we have to move on.
Thank you.